Hi, this is a Curvy 3D4 tutorial showing how I made some of the trickier parts of my Templar model. Here's the model in Curvy. The parts are all drawn and sculpted from scratch in Curvy, and these are the parts that I'm going to be explaining: some chainmail, a cloak, a chainmail texture, and a sword. So let's start with the cloak. This is a single loft object with no sculpting required. The draw order of the parts is important. We draw along the shape first. Then we draw the top of the shape, a very undulated, curvy, wiggly line for the cloak. Just increase the resolution a bit. And we can shape the curve with the soft move tool. We want to copy the wiggly curve at the top, at the bottom, so we use curve clone and then move it into place. Just turn on my keyboard shortcuts. So this is going to let us control the shape along the curve, the shape of the top of the cloak, and the shape of the bottom of the cloak. Again, using the soft move tool to move that into place. Now, I actually drew the wrong side of the cloak first, so I'm going to redraw that on the other side. And redraw the long curved arch. So now we have four curves. We have along, top, bottom, and the other side of the along. And the loft will try and fit to all four curves. You notice the green lines are giving you a hint of which corners should line up with each other. So just by moving these edge curves, we're getting a lot of definition. Now increase the depth just to add a little bit of an edge to the cloak, smoothing out the bottom curve. And you can keep on editing the curves as much as you like. You could go in and add more detail with a sculpting brush later, but for this I didn't need to. And there's my finished cloak. Still just a single loft. You can see the four curves there. And that's the finished cloak in position. Next, just a quick one, I'll show you how I made the sword. Usually every shape in Curvy is curved and soft, organic shapes. But if you want to draw a hard-edged shape, you can use the ruler tool to straighten out the curves. I also found using a very low resolution, I could approximate the shape of the sword I wanted. But it's still looking very soft. So I needed to give it some hard edges using flat shading. And finally we need to make it thin like a sword blade. We can't squash the lathe because the lathe is always round. So we need to convert it into a mesh. So I do convert it into a normal mesh, and then the scaling tool will work. Just stretch it out. It gives me a quick sword blade. Now next is the chainmail. The chainmail skirt is a mesh, so there's a lot of detail there in that mesh. hundreds of little links. I also wanted chainmail on the body, the arms and the legs, but I didn't want to model that all, so I used a texture. I'll show you how I made the texture for the arms and the legs. So that's just a texture map. So first, to draw the chainmail, I draw a squashed circle, and then use redraw as circle arc to turn it into a loop, and close the loop with the object properties closed loop. Just shrink the width a bit, tweak the resolution, and this is a single link from the chainmail. Next, I'm going to duplicate that. Duplicate and move it snug up next to the side of the first loop. Then I select both loops, duplicate again with Ctrl D, and I want these offset so they line up with the loops above. They're about halfway across the loops above. Now to interlink, they need to be tilted. So tilt the bottom row forwards and the top row back. There are many styles of chainmail. This is a fairly simple one to make. But because they're all repeated patterns, they'll all use similar steps. And just looking by, moving these up so they don't intersect. And this pattern of 4 links is the basis for all my chainmail. So I'm going to save this pattern for later. We're going to reuse it both for the texture and for the mesh version of the chainmail. So just duplicate one of those for later. And I'm going to join these links together, so instead of having 4 separate line objects, we now just have a single mesh. Just shrink them down. So now we're going to make the texture, which we're going to use for the arm and the leg. But we need some more links for that. So we're going to use duplicate proxy, and then if you hold down proxy, you get a choice of styles, and we're going to use the array style of proxies. We get 2 dimensions. We're going to go for about 4x4, 3x3, 4x4. Then we click on offset A, and that lets us do 1 offset. So we're dragging that sideways again by, and then we're clicking on offset B and dragging down, and this is giving us an array, a grid of copies of the object. So we just need a small part of the grid, but where all the links are visible. Next, we're going to turn on the camera panel and change the depth. The blue areas are clipped too far, and the red areas are clipped too close. So if we change the depth, we can get a proper range of white to black over the depth of the view. And that we're going to use that for the bump map. We need a proper height depth for the bump map. So once that is looking good, we can screenshot and paste it into this is the GIMP, but you can use any image editing program. Going back into Curvy, I'm just going to make a slightly brighter view, so we get a diffuse channel for our map as well. Just pushing up the ambient slightly. Again, using print screen. and taking it into GIMP. We're going to paste this on top of the other one as a new layer. That's important because we want them both to be cropped identically. So now we have a diffuse layer and a depth layer. And now we're going to crop out a repeating pattern. So I'm using that cusp between two rings as my point that I'm going to repeat on. So that's clipped out one ring and all the connecting rings. I might want a slightly larger texture, so I'm going to pull it out to the next repeating point. But it's a very careful step to make sure this image will then tile properly later. I'm going to just save that as chain depth. And save out the other layer as chain diffuse. We could also save out an ambient occlusion map if we wanted. So the same technique I've used for dragon scales. Again, making a small repeating depth map and then turning that into a texture map. So let's try that new chainmail texture out on a quick lathe. I'm going to load the diffuse map and load the bump map, the depth. Scale the bump value up to 1. On the black areas in between the links, we don't want any shine, so you can use a copy of the diffuse texture there as well. Just load on a metallic shiny texture. So there I'm going to use the diffuse channel again to get rid of the highlight and the gaps. Just take away the ambient so it looks very metallic. So at the moment we have one link. If we go on to View, Panels, Texture Placement, we get a couple of sliders for the texture scale, scaling in U and V. And we go from one link to, again, hundreds and hundreds of links. And here's the links on the finished arm of the model. Now for the chain skirt, we want to repeat the array process, but using a much larger array to get lots and lots of links. Because there are going to be so many links, I'm going to reduce the resolution. So I'm going to use that copied links from earlier and make a low-res version. We can select all of the lines, press A to show wireframe, and reduce the resolution as far as is possible. Otherwise we'll just have millions and millions of polys in our chain skirt. Then we're going to follow the same steps as before. We're going to join the links together into a single mesh and then use duplicate proxy to get the proxy editing working. Edit, duplicate proxy, hold down on proxy, switch to array type. This time we're going to use a much larger array, try 12 by 12. Click on offset A and drag that into place. Click on offset B. Your offsets can have rotations as well, so you can get some quite funky effects by using rotation and offsets. Now we want a long skirt, so we're going to reduce the number of links in sideways and increase the number down. Finally, we bake that action. When we bake, it'll turn all of the links into proxy copies of the original object. We want mesh copies, so we bake it twice. To select them all, I'm typing in the name into the find window with a little dot after it. So if I put links low and then a dot, it'll find all the objects called links low something, like links low res, which saves me having to select hundreds and hundreds of objects. Then I join them all into a single mesh, and this is about 100,000 triangle mesh, to make some chainmail fabric. We're going to then cut this into shape. First I want to give it a slight bend. This is using a 4.1 tool called Gradient Mask. You can use the bend tool as well in 4.0. So now we've got the chainmail sheet. We're going to use the lasso tool to select out some links we want to remove. Just dragging a loop around all the links we don't want. Notice it's cut through lots of links, so we want to select full links. So I'm going to select connected. So now we've got full loops selected, and we delete those with delete key, and now we've got the skirt. Because it's a mesh, we can just use the sculpting tools to shape the chain skirt. We can use the soft move tools as well, and that gives the chainmail skirt. Now the final thing I want to show is some extra camera controls. So if you view panel's camera, you can change the camera distance to change how much perspective distortion there is. You can go from a very long distance to give an orthographic type view, or a very short distance to give a fisheye type view. I find this makes can make the model pop a bit. So for my Templar, I use quite a short distance to give a quite strong perspective effect. You can also use tilt to rotate the view. Check out my other tutorials to see how I made the other pieces from lathes and lofts and cutting.